Once you know your purpose, your investment thesis, you're going to want to know what criteria is going to guide you to say yes or no to investing in something. So the principles, which are expressed through investment criteria, are our fundamental beliefs about how we're going to conduct ourselves. They're precepts or guidelines against which every decision we make, every action we take, every investment we make will be judged, that we're going to hold ourselves to account for. And we're going to add various kinds of questions at the heart of them that are going to help us arrive at our declaration of investment criteria, right? So first of all, what outcome? What are we looking for in the world? What are we trying to create? What trade-offs are we going to deal with, right? So we're going to look at beliefs. In the case of a community-based investing fund, there may be trade-offs between economic justice and ecological sustainability. Maybe there's a whole bunch of bullseyes that hit at the center, but sometimes you're going to be trading things off one for another. You're going to make trade-offs around risk, return, and impact. Again, in the module on laying the foundation for integrated capital, we talked about redefining risk, relocating return, and understanding that impact exists throughout the whole system. So there are going to be trade-offs. What do we do about our community investors? Do we de-risk it for them by not taking risk in an entrepreneur who needs capital? So again, how do we deal with those trade-offs? What about, are we investing in the beginning of things? Are we catalyzing new initiatives, or are we scaling proven strategies? Are we doing both? This question of necessary and sufficient conditions for capital deployment, right? What do we have to have? What would be nice to have? We can't always hit the bullseye every time. And also the bigger picture of leverage, right? Are we unlocking other capital? If we wanted to bring in other investors, what are we willing to give up to do that? So these are some of the inquiries that might help you develop your investment criteria. Those are the questions that we went through at Boston Impact Initiative as we arrived at our core investment criteria. So on this slide, you're seeing 4 centers of concern, right? The first and the most important, essentially, for BII is economic justice. And inside of economic justice, we're talking about ownership. Who owns assets in the community? That means buildings, land, and the means of production. The means of production is business. So what are the demographics of the owners of the business? How much of it do they own? How equitable is that ownership? Do workers own anything? Opportunity is quality jobs. What kind of opportunity for growth? Is it a high road employer? Are they paying a living wage? Are there benefits? Who has been left out of job opportunity that is being brought into this enterprise? And procurement practices, meaning who are you purchasing from as an enterprise? What does your supply chain look like? How equitable is that? So those are all in the bucket of economic justice. Climate resilience. So we're very interested in, yes, nature, ecological footprint, ecological stewardship, things like closed loop manufacturing processes, anything that obviously is about clean energy. But we're interested in more than that. We're also interested in resilience. Resilience means the ability of a system to respond to disruption and maintain its form. So how resilient is an enterprise? How resilient does it make its community? And by localization, it's a lot like supply chain. We mean local production for local consumption. We don't want to bring in manufacturing from China or from far away and have it travel a long distance and have those dollars leave the community. We want local production to circulate to local consumption, and then we keep the dollars in the community, and that's also climate resilient. Third, we have governance and power. This is something that gets forgotten about quite a lot in impact investing. So we're really interested in what roles do workers have in having agency, in having governance. So a worker-owned cooperative is 100% worker-owned and worker-governed, but there are lots of other structures through which workers can have power, including unions. Community participation. Is there a role for community voice? Are there tranches of community ownership? What are the other ways? A community land trust. What are the other ways that community can have a voice in governance? And by relationships in general, we mean we look at an enterprise and we say, are you more inclined toward cooperation than competition? Obviously, competition is part of our capital system, but there are ways to choose cooperation over competition, and we want to find enterprises that are inclined toward that. And finally, the thing that most investment funds focus on alone is the enterprise health, or mostly usually profit making. In this case, we're looking again at health and resilience. We want to know that if we make an investment, that this enterprise is going to be around. They're going to be able to adapt to disruption and change. So is their financing structure healthy? Do they have a healthy balance sheet? Are they over leveraged? Meaning, do they have too much debt on the balance sheet and they need equity? Do they have friendly investors? Are they aligned with their investors, or is there some misalignment there? The leadership. So on leadership, there's lots and lots to say and teach about leadership, but for the purposes of this conversation, we'll say we're inclined to find leaders who think of themselves as hosting collective intelligence rather than following heroics. We're not looking for the person who has all the answers. We're looking for someone who builds a web of relationships around them and leads from that. And finally, organizational culture. So does the culture reward appropriate risk-taking and creativity? Is it a culture where people can thrive? So you can see there's these 4 dynamics. You can't get all of everything at the same time. So you're really working with these trade-offs and saying, what can't we give up? What do we need to double down on? What are we willing to move a little bit? And you look at each enterprise through its own lens and see where it is today against your investment criteria, but also what happens as you're in relationship with them over time. How might they grow, and how might you support them in growing? So that's the investment criteria. I want to offer one more piece, which is, in the case of BII Fund 2, what we call investment themes. And this also just helps us refine where we're pointing, that North Star we talked about in the investment thesis. This just gives a little bit more clarity about what we're aiming for. So for one, explicitly, we're investing in enterprises owned by people of color. So that's a requirement. And we're interested in particularly unmet needs and or issues affecting communities of color. And you'll see examples when I offer you some investments that we are looking at, that investable pipeline that we talked about. Building climate resilience and expanding clean energy. And growing worker and community power and voice, specifically co-ops, worker-owned and unionized businesses. So it's asking a question, if we have worker power as a value, what does that actually look like when you look out into the marketplace? You say, oh, it's a co-op or it's a union. The other theme is the community-owned or controlled real estate. And so we want to share, what does that exactly look like? So it looks like ownership and control over commercial and residential buildings while preventing displacement. It looks like tranches of community ownership in real estate projects. So you might have a more conventional real estate project, but there's a sliver of the capital stack that community members can invest in and get the benefit from financially. And finally, again, this piece of decision-making, right? So for example, community land trusts or MINTs, mixed income neighborhood trusts, where community members have a say over the allocation of those assets. So these idea of themes are useful for helping to refine the investment criteria and help point your principles in the right direction.